The former Labour leader Ed Miliband is calling for a vote in Parliament on the government's plans for Brexit. And Mr Miliband, who voted for the UK to remain in the European Union, is here right now. Good morning.
Nice to be with you.
What exactly is it that you want?
Well, look, first thing to say is I accept the result of this referendum. The British people voted to leave the European Union. We need to honour that vote. This is not about trying to reverse the result through Parliament. But what they didn't vote for was a particular type of Brexit. And there are lots of decisions to be made about immigration, about the economy and the single market. And my point is Parliament's got to take a view on that, if you like, to give the government a mandate for the negotiations, because we now know that Theresa May, by the end of March, is going to be triggering Article 50 to start leaving the European Union. And my basic point is the government can't go off and do these negotiations without getting the consent of Parliament for the way they're going to go about these negotiations and what they're going to be arguing for the British people. And ultimately, that's the point, which is if this is all about sovereignty, the sovereignty of the people, which lots of people who wanted to leave the European Union said it was, then Parliament and as a representative of the people have to take a view, and the people have to be consulted. You know, people have to have laid before them the choices, the strategy of the government.
The British public voted to leave the EU. They didn't vote to leave the EU subject to a vote by you and your colleagues in Parliament. Exactly.
That's why I'm not saying let's try and reverse the result. Look, there are some people on the Labour side and others who said, Parliament, this is an advisory referendum, you know, we shouldn't necessarily go through with it. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we're going to be leaving the European Union. That's what the British people voted for. But we've got to get those negotiations right. It was Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, who said last week the British people didn't vote to make themselves poorer. And he's right about that. And what worried me about some of what we heard at the Conservative conference was, I understand the concerns about immigration. I see them in my own constituency. But what I felt was that our whole economy was in danger of being thrown off the cliff, our biggest trading relationship in the single market, in a kind of quite cavalier fashion. And the way we've got to go about these negotiations is in a careful, considered and indeed consultative way with Parliament and the people.
But the government has the authority to deliver the will of the people without having to go back to Parliament to check with MPs the terms of Brexit.
Well, I think that's an open question. I mean, my contention is that in principle, politically, for the good of the country, I don't really think the government has a right. You see, if they begin the negotiations without consulting Parliament, then after 2 years or less than 2 years, they'll just come to Parliament and say, well, it's yes or no. I mean, I assume that they'll try and get the final negotiations through Parliament, but it'll be too late by then. You know, we need to be knowing now what the government is going to be negotiating for, and I believe they need to get the consent of MPs because there's no other mandate here. The Conservative manifesto said that the Conservative Party was determined to stay in the single market. Now, it sounded from what Theresa May and some of her ministers were saying that we were going to leave the single market, contrary to the manifesto. So there's no mandate for a hard Brexit, a huge separation from the single market, I don't believe. And that's why I think Parliament's got to be consulted.
So what is the process then of how MPs would get a vote?
Well, my suggestion would be, and obviously it's for the government to think about this, but my suggestion would be they put forward a negotiating strategy in a white paper or a green paper, that's a government document, and Parliament votes on that.
But why would they show their hand to other EU leaders?
The reality about these negotiations is they're going to be pretty public pretty quickly, in my view. Look, you know, very little is secret in today's world. And once they go into these negotiations, it will be pretty clear. And this shouldn't be done by a series of half briefings and leaks and all of that. The government should set out its opening position. Sure, its opening position, maybe not its totally final position, but its opening position in a white paper or green paper, and put it to Parliament. And that will force them to consult MPs of all parties. And this is a really important point, Victoria. It's not just Labour MPs saying it, it's Tory MPs. It's not just Remainers saying it, it's people who voted for Leave. I was talking to a Conservative MP yesterday, Stephen Phillips. He's concerned about this. He's a Conservative MP who was supporting Leave. So, you know, this is not about rerunning the referendum. This is about getting the right outcome for the country.
If you got that vote, and if Parliament voted against the government, would that mean that Britain remained in the European Union?
It would mean the government would have to come back with a different negotiating strategy because they wouldn't have got the consent of Parliament for these. And the point about these negotiations is they won't just matter for 2 or 3 years. They'll matter for the next 20, 30, 40 years, about our place in the world, about our economy, about people's jobs and livelihoods. it's like these are too important to be left to behind closed-door discussions within government when there's no mandate for the particular type of negotiations the government's embarking on.
I hear what you say about this is not about rerunning the referendum. Despite what you have clearly said this morning, there will still be people watching you now who will suspect that as a Remainer you are trying to deny the outcome of this EU referendum with a vote in Parliament. I'm
not. And you know, one of the reasons I'm not is my own constituency. Doncaster voted 69% to 31% to leave the European Union. Look, I've heard the mandate, but I think we owe it. I owe it as somebody who was elected by my constituents to seek the best outcome for them, given what they voted for. And, you know, people didn't vote for a particular type of Brexit. That was part of the problem of the campaign, was it wasn't exactly clear what we were voting for. I think lots of people will be thinking, whether they voted Remain or Leave, look, the right thing to do is to get the best outcome for the country. And, of course, there's got to be parliamentary consent for that. You know, after all, the sovereign body is Parliament. The people ultimately, obviously, are sovereign. This was supposed to be about returning sovereignty. How can you bypass the sovereign body of the people, Parliament?
If the mood music was for a soft Brexit, i.e. retaining, you know, access to the single market, still being a member of the single market, with lesser control on immigration, would you still be arguing for this?
Well, it's a mood music from government.
Yes.
Well, I am more alarmed by the hard Brexit position that the government is taking. I'll be honest about that. And it's not just me that's alarmed. You've got the CBI this morning that's extremely alarmed. So I'm worried about the direction in which it's going. But yes, I think the principle is right. The principle of Parliament being consulted is the right one.
OK. I want to move on to a couple of other issues, if I may. I'd like to play you a clip of Theresa May's speech from the Conservative Party conference last week, which I'm sure you heard bits of, but here it is.
To stand up for the weak and to stand up to the strong.
He may be strong at standing up to the weak, but he's always weak when it comes to standing up against the strong.
That's why, where markets are dysfunctional, we should be prepared to intervene.
Some people will just blame the companies, but actually, ultimately, I don't think that's where the blame lies. I think it lies with government. I think it lies with government for not having had the strength to take this on, not having stood up to the powerful interests.
Yet within our society today, we see division and unfairness all around, between a more prosperous older generation and a struggling younger generation, between the wealth of London and the rest of the country. But perhaps most of all, between the rich, the successful and the powerful and their fellow citizens.
Are you satisfied with a country which shuts out the voices of millions of ordinary people and listens only to the powerful? Are you satisfied with a country standing apart as two nations? Well, I'm not satisfied. We're Britain. We're better than this.
Well,
look, it is true. I mean, I helped Theresa May write the speech.
When you were watching her, what was your actual reaction?
Gosh, that sounds familiar. You know, look, let me give her a bit of credit for a second, because I think what she did recognise in her conference speech and before was that this referendum, this Brexit vote, wasn't just about Europe. Of course, it was about Europe and immigration and so on, but it was about a deeper dissatisfaction with the direction of the country. Now, look, the question for her is, can she deliver? Can she deliver on all the things she said? She's planning to cut tax credits, which is going to be bad for the people that she was talking about. I think hard Brexit would be bad for the people that she's talking about. You know, she was famously, I think, recently having dinner with Rupert Murdoch. I don't think he quite agrees with the strategy she's talking about. You know, where's the policy on non-doms, which was something I said, people who don't pay taxes are richest in our society. So, you know, but I say, let's judge her. I mean, I'll judge her on her actions.
I want to ask you about the US presidential debate last night. You're a keen follower of US politics.
I didn't stay up for it, I must
No, that's fair enough. But I know you've followed the news this morning. There is a comparison between Donald Trump and Jeremy Corbyn, clearly not in terms of policy, but in the fact that they attract those people who are anti-politics. Do you think that's fair?
I think it's different, but there are, the similarities are these, which is that all around the world people are tapping into deep discontent with the way the country is going. Now, I think Jeremy Corbyn has totally different solutions from Donald Trump, as I think both of them would say as well. I think it's very troubling, the Donald Trump candidacy. I think whatever the outcome, it's troubling because millions and millions of Americans are going to vote for him. And I think it's a real sign that the sort of capitalist system, the kind of system that America and indeed Britain is putting forward and has for a long time, is in real disrepute with people. And if people are willing to ignore that terrible tape, his misogyny, his racism, it tells you something about how deep the dissatisfaction is.
Do you believe Labour can win a general election under Jeremy Corbyn?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, he got re-elected by our party. We've got more members than I think we've had in 40 or 50 years. He has mobilised party members and people who weren't party members in a way that even I didn't do so. Now the task is for all of us to take this out to the country and convince the country. And, you know, I think there has been a change in terms of attitude and will among the parliamentary party since Jeremy's re-election. I think there's an acceptance that he won, an acceptance that people have got to work with him and support him. It doesn't mean there won't be disagreements. It doesn't mean there'll be, you know, constant peace. But it does mean there's a sense that we've got to focus on the country, not the party.
And what sort of evidence will you... I mean, how will you measure his success as we head towards a general election? What are you looking for in terms of that wider electorate appealing to the
I would say in these things, as a former leader, I never liked it when other leaders commentated or marked me out of 10. And so I'm not going to mark him out of 10. I'm going to do my bit. I think this Brexit thing is really important. It's one of the things that I'm concentrating on, but I'm going to support him because I think it's the right thing to do. The party's made its choice, and I think we should accept it.
His latest top team appointments came last week. Were you invited to be a member of it?
I wasn't invited formally. I've made clear for some time that I thought my role was best served on the back benches. It's partly because I've been in the front line for a long time. I wanted a break from the front line. I thought there's other things I could do from the back benches. I wanted to carry on doing those things.
OK. So that means you wouldn't ever serve on the front bench?
No, it doesn't.
Under Jeremy
It doesn't
Corbyn?
mean that, no.
Okay.
It means that at the moment I'm happy doing what I'm doing.
Right, OK. A quick word about the reshuffle. 2 Labour whips, people responsible for party discipline, have resigned overnight in protest at the sacking last week of the chief whip, Labour's chief whip, Rosie Winterton. Do you think that was a brutal sacking?
Well, look, Rosie's a really good friend of mine. I appointed her as chief whip, so I think she's a brilliant person. She was always the first name on my team sheet, as I would always say to her. But leaders have to make their decisions. And just like I'm not going to commentate on his performance or marks out of 10, I'm not going to commentate on his reshuffle. You know, he needs to decide who he wants in his top team, and that's his entitlement. He won the leadership election. He's entitled to do that. OK.
Do former Labour leaders comment on former Labour colleagues being on Strictly Come Dancing?
He's brilliant, isn't he?
Have you been watching?
I have. I watched a clip, actually, of... I mean, you know, he's got better and better, hasn't he? There he is.
Do you think he's got better and better?
Well,
what are you basing that on?
Well, didn't he do better last week than he did the week before?
He's definitely thrown himself into it a little bit more. He looks slightly less embarrassed.
National treasure.
Do you reckon?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to sort of paint my face green anytime soon, but, you know, it suits him, let me say.
All right. Well, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Ed Miliband.